I'm thrilled and honored to announce the upcoming release of a project that's been in the works for over 6 years, the product of a profound investigation into one of America's most baffling mysteries, performed by my good friend and fellow researcher Kevin Guhl. Kevin is in the process of finishing up a book on the mystery of the infamous Thunderbird photograph, an enigmatic historical document which thousands of people swear they have seen before in some unremembered publication, yet which none have been able to relocate. Kevin's upcoming book is, without question, the most in-depth treatment of the subject to date, and which I have no doubt will be regarded in perpetuity as the seminal authority on the topic. I am privileged to have played a small role in the commencement of this project back in the summer of 2018, when I first met Kevin in an online forum. I had just finished my book, Legends of the Nahanni Valley, which delves into the dark mystery surrounding a remote region in Canada's Northwest Territories, but was haunted by a loose end that I had left unresolved. 2 of the legends I had researched were based on the testimonies of a man named Frank Graves, who had made an expedition to the Nahanni Valley in 1965. Although I had failed to track Graves down while doing research for my book, I decided to take one last crack at it. Not only would an interview with Graves give me first-hand insight into the legends his testimonies engendered, it would also allow me to solve one of the Nahanni's minor mysteries, namely the fate of lost footage taken during the 1965 expedition, which were last known to have been in Graves' possession. Early into my search for Frank Graves, I learned that the cryptid hunter, as I later dubbed him, was supposed to have once owned a copy of the notorious Thunderbird photograph, and had allegedly brought it with him into the Pennsylvania wilds in 1966, during his investigation into a spate of strange bird sightings reported in the area. I included this information in blind solicitations for clues, which I posted in various online forums. One of my solicitations caught the attention of Kevin Guhl, who had a special fascination with the Thunderbird photo, and was planning to do a deep dive into that great unsolved mystery. Kevin reached out to me, and after some back and forth, we agreed to look for Frank Graves together. Our efforts were crowned with success in the summer of 2018, when we got the cryptid hunter on the phone. Although my correspondence with Frank would lead to the creation of what would become my most popular YouTube video, Kevin's many subsequent conversations with the old adventurer were the first steps in a wild 6-year journey that would take him to the rugged hills of Pennsylvania, draw him to files in dusty archives that hadn't been opened in decades, and put him in touch with invaluable first-hand sources tied to the history of the Thunderbird photo, at least 4 of whom have since died. That last observation is a sobering reminder of an inside joke that Kevin and I shared, namely that the Thunderbird photo might be cursed. We conceived this notion while ruminating on the fact that 2 alleged copies of the photograph were lost in terrible building fires, and saw it verified in the many accidents that befell those who were supposed to have been in possession of it, and in the many roadblocks encountered by those who have attempted to track it down. The curse of the Thunderbird photo struck again during the making of this video, when an audio file that I had worked on all day failed to properly save, something that has never happened to me before in all my years of YouTubing. In this video, I will read the introduction to Kevin's upcoming book, the most thorough investigation into the Thunderbird photo ever conducted. In addition to the script, many of the images used in this video can be found on Kevin's website, thunderbirdphoto.com, to which I've included a link in the description. Enjoy. It's one of cryptozoology's most intriguing legends and enduring mysteries. The search for the missing Thunderbird photo, said to be an old newspaper picture of several hunters posing with the body of a gigantic bird. Countless people believe they have seen this haunting image, yet no one can ever find the original again. It might sound like a pseudoscientific urban legend, but there is a truth behind this enigma that stretches back 6 decades. The result of 6 years of intensive historical research and interviews, this excerpt from my upcoming book, documenting the history of the Thunderbird photo, tells the in-depth story of how the legend began. And it started with 2 men who couldn't have been more different, yet shared a powerful attraction to everything anomalous and unexplained. Globe-trotting biologist and writer Ivan T. Sanderson, and backwoods folklorist and fantasist Hiram M. Cranmer. Sanderson, the renowned Scottish-born author, naturalist, and media personality who traveled the world during the first half of the 20th century, collecting animal specimens for the British Museum, launched a stunning career swerve later in life when he moved to the United States and established the Society for the Investigation of the Unexplained, or SITU, in 1967. Sanderson's focus on the planet's array of amazing yet scientifically identified animals switched to groundbreaking examinations of Bigfoot, sea serpents, UFOs, and other mysterious phenomena. He is remembered today primarily for these later pursuits, and as being one of the forefathers of cryptozoology, the study of and search for wondrous, often legendary animals, yet unrecognized by science. Sanderson's home and situ headquarters was an 11-room house constructed in 1682, and various buildings located on farmland in rural Polkville, near Blairstown, in Warren County, New Jersey. Cranmer lived most of his life, from 1891 to his death in a house fire in 1967, in Hammersley Fork, a forested tributary of Kettle Creek in Lady Township, Pennsylvania. Cranmer served on the front lines in World War I and was weakened by poison gas in the Battle of the Argonne Forest in France during the final months of the war. In civilian life back home, Cranmer held the positions of postmaster and justice of the peace. He had experience as a carpenter and a farmhand, but most fondly recalled his years as a lumberman locally and in camps throughout the United States. Cranmer was an amateur historian and writer, penning histories on Lady Township and the lumber industry on the West Branch of the Susquehanna. Cranmer possessed a wealth of regional folk tales and songs, and was a longtime member and vice president of the Pennsylvania Folklore Society. He was greatly intrigued by the strange, and regularly corresponded with publications covering topics such as UFOs, cryptids, and ghosts. The saga of the Thunderbird photo would begin, appropriately enough, in the May 1963 issue of Saga magazine. Saga was a men's adventure magazine, part of a testosterone-fueled genre that thrived in the 1950s through the early 70s. Many of these magazines enticed readers with luridly illustrated covers that featured square-jawed heroes, scowling villains, ferocious animals, and scantily clad damsels in distress. Phil Stevenson Payne, who catalogs these titles on his Galactic Central website, wrote, "Sometimes referred to as the post-war pulps, these magazines specialize in true stories of rugged adventure, which often stretch the meaning of the word true considerably." An article in the May 1963 saga called "Monster Bird That Carries Off Human Beings" by Jack Pearl contains the earliest known reference to the now infamous photograph. Pearl's article is graced by a 2-page opening spread of a man locked in mortal combat with an enormous Thunderbird. Vividly illustrated in color by John McDermott, the jet-black, eagle-like predator clenches an axe in its beak, while crimson blood seeps from a wound in its wing. Its ravaged attacker struggles to free himself from the beast's talons. A bosomy woman kneels in the dry grass below them, protecting a prone child the Thunderbird had attempted to devour. The image perfectly captures an attack which Pearl describes early in the article, an incident he claims occurred on an isolated farm near Ivanpah, California in 1933. Pearl recounted a history of monster birds in North America dating back to the Ice Age, which he asserted were immortalized in Native American mythology as Thunderbirds. He described accounts of often violent encounters with these creatures from the days of the American frontier, a hotbed of sightings in the mountains of Pennsylvania, and modern incidents involving aircraft, one fatal. But this paragraph of Pearl's would launch a legend. In the year 1886, the Tombstone, Arizona Epitaph, which helped make Wyatt Earp famous, published a photograph of a huge bird nailed to a wall. The newspaper said it had been shot by 2 prospectors and hauled into town by wagon. Lined up in front of the bird were 6 grown men with their arms outstretched, fingertip to fingertip. The creature measured about 36 feet from wingtip to wingtip. Strange magazine editor Mark Travinsky, in his deep investigation into the Thunderbird photo, identified Cranmer as the source of the tale. That's because a letter from Cranmer, printed in the September 1963 edition of Fate magazine, contained both of his own sightings of giant birds in Pennsylvania, along with this extremely similar passage. Sometime about the year 1900, 2 prospectors shot and carried into Tombstone, Arizona, on a burrow one of these birds. When nailed against the wall of the Tombstone Epitaph, its wingspread measured 36 feet. A picture showed 6 men, with outstretched arms touching, standing under the bird. Later, a group of actors dressed as professionals were photographed under the bird, with one of them saying, "Shucks, there is no such bird, never was, and never will be." Chorvinsky suggested that Cranmer, a frequent letter writer, contacted both Saga and Fate. Saga simply got through its mail pile sooner than the smaller staffed Fate. While Pearl does not name Cranmer as his source, the clues he gives us, and the many details duplicated in the Pearl material and the Cranmer Fate letter, demonstrates that it was more accident than design that the first mention of the T-Bird photo in print was in Saga. It could have appeared just as easily in Fate first, but Pearl decided to use it to inspire or perhaps beef up his pulpy article, Chorvinsky concluded. Cranmer's story does indeed have its genesis in the Tombstone Epitaph, in a bizarre article published on April 26, 1890, titled Found on the Desert. The report describes a strange encounter in which two ranchers on horseback shot down a winged monster on the desert outside of Tombstone. However, it was most certainly not a giant bird. The creature was described as resembling an alligator with smooth skin, an elongated tail, 2 feet, and an 8-foot-long head, boasting sharp teeth and eyes as large as dinner plates. Its wingspread was an incredible 160 feet, larger than a Boeing 737. While clearly not a bird, this description dovetails with the many recollections of the photo that describe the beast as resembling a pterosaur. The epitaph also did not publish a photograph, nor did it mention one. According to Mark Boardman, current editor of the Tombstone Epitaph, the earliest known photograph to appear in the publication was a 1907 ad for an act at the Opera House. Photos were very sporadic throughout the 1920s, interspersed with drawings and other illustrations, he said. However, the article's concluding line stating that several prominent men who will endeavor to bring the strange creature to this city before it is mutilated does suggest the professors in Cranmer's account, and the likelihood that the moment would have been captured on film for posterity. Following Cranmer's second mention of the Thunderbird photo, in the March 1966 Fate, the epitaph was bombarded with letters asking about the project. The mailbag was so overwhelming that it prompted Wayne Winters, then editor of the epitaph, to send his own letter for publication in the August 1966 Fate, pleading with readers to cease their inquiries. "I'm afraid that Mr. Cranmer is pulling your leg when he tells of the famed Thunderbird. You may be certain that he's doing so, as to any connection between such a fowl and the epitaph," wrote Winters. "Although I have not edited this publication that long, I've gone back through our files for the past 65 years and find no mention of this bird, or the picture or the actions to publicize it, that Mr. Cranmer attributes to me. Please take the heat off my typewriter, and tell your readers that I have no pictures available of this critter. Indeed, I too would like to see a photo of this fowl, but I believe that fowl, with a U, is more the nature of this yarn." The Thunderbird is an important storm entity, prevalent in indigenous belief across North America. While fearfully powerful, it is also associated with life-bringing rain. The form of the Thunderbird varies, depending on the people and the telling, but it can range from an elemental force, to an anthropomorphic form, to an enormous flesh-and-blood bird that snatches whales in its talons. The Cree, one of Canada's First Nations, believe these divine birds cause the lightning by the flashings of their eyes, and with their wings make the noise of thunder. The thunderbolts are the invisible and flaming arrows shot by these birds. Based on my own research, I believe Cranmer was the first writer to apply the term Thunderbird to modern sightings of flesh-and-blood monster birds in various publications, co-opting it from the spiritual and symbolic being of Native American beliefs. Pearl carried over this term, and it stuck, becoming the go-to term for giant birds in modern cryptozoology. Pearl's article in the May 1963 Saga made an impression on Sanderson, although a couple of months later, he was uncertain which of the many publications that crossed his desk had printed it. He sat down on July 7th and jotted down a page of notes outlining what he remembered. Sanderson narrowed the source down to Saga, Argosy, or True, and its publication to March or April 1963. He recalled Pearl's assertion that these predatory birds inspired Native American legends, and the sightings documented in Pennsylvania, among other details. However, one line in Sanderson's notes raises an eyebrow. He wrote that the article in question showed a referenced photo of a 36-foot wingspan Thunderbird in the Tombstone Epitaph. 1887 approximate, exact data in article. The emphasis on showed is mine. Could this mean that, 2 months on, Sanderson misremembered the Saga article as having actually included the Thunderbird photo, rather than just having described it? It suggests the unsettling possibility that Sanderson, who was responsible for popularizing the decades-long search for the Thunderbird photo, might himself have been the victim of a false memory. One prevalent hypothesis about the Thunderbird photo is that the mere description of it is so evocative as to create a false memory of having actually seen it, and that this has been happening to people for decades. Our memories are highly malleable and often unreliable. Criminal psychologist and memory expert Dr. Julia Shaw described how post-event information can influence our memories and come from many possible sources, such as discussing an event with others in person or online, reading articles about the event or related events, or seeing photos taken by ourselves or others. We are also prone to memory borrowing, appropriating someone else's experiences as our own. People unintentionally confabulate disparate fragments of information into meaningful contexts, explaining how some have impossible memories of early childhood that are derived from stories told by parents, old photographs, etc. One 2008 study demonstrated that just showing participants photos of specific locations they had never visited made them more likely to mistakenly report having visited those places a week or two later. Any source of information has the potential to change our memories post hoc, wrote Shaw. Why does this happen? As explained by Shaw, memory is made possible by the neuronal plasticity of our brains. Our brain cells, neurons, form networks that connect and store related information, enabling us to learn and adapt. It is an essential survival mechanism. According to scientific theory, wrote Shaw, every time a memory is recalled, it is effectively retrieved, examined, and then recreated from scratch to be stored again. Therefore, any time an event is remembered, it would be prone to corruption by present stimuli, replacing the original memory with a falsified version. However, the false memory hypothesis might not be so deflating after all. There are witnesses who offer convincing and very similar testimony that they saw the Thunderbird photo in Sanderson's possession. In another set of notes, undated, but probably written after he managed to acquire a copy of the May 1963 Saga magazine, and possibly the September 1963 Fate, Sanderson wrote down his impressions of the Thunderbird from reading all that stuff. A bird with a wingspan from 15 to 25 feet. Dark in color usually, standing about 7 to 10 feet tall. Of generally solitary and largely nocturnal habits. Question: perhaps there was more than one type of T-bird, one nocturnal, one less so. The bird may or may not have white patches on the front edge of its wings and on top of the head. The marks again may be a sign of maturity. They eat apparently what the bald eagle eats, i.e. carrion, fish, live game, if it's not too large, active, and the bird is hungry. Recurring stories of T-birds carrying or attempting to carry away people, especially children. Question: a bald eagle, wingspread 8 feet, can just barely carry away a rabbit 5 to 8 pounds. Would like to see math that says bird with 3 times wingspread can carry 10 times load. But if they did it before my eyes, I wouldn't argue. At that point, a bumblebee would probably arrive, walking, and drag me away. Oddly, very seldom mention of shape of beak. Important. Sanderson doodled a series of sketches, including one of a bird with a 25-foot wingspread, carrying off a 5-foot, 110-pound human being. He noted, maybe abscond with a child, certainly a baby, but not a full-grown person. Lift 10 feet, okay. Fly, no believe. The next sketch is Sanderson's quick artistic rendering of the Thunderbird photo itself. Depending on when he drew it, the existence of his sketch offers some puzzling clues regarding the entire mystery. Was Sanderson just sketching a rendition of the photo, as described by Pearl and Cranmer? Coupled with Sanderson's curiosity about the photograph in his earlier set of notes, does this suggest that he had not seen a copy of the actual photo prior to that time? That would mean he acquired it no earlier than July 1963, had it in his possession around June 1966, and realized it was missing by January 1971, based on correspondence referenced further below. Or is this Sanderson's sketch of the actual photograph? It very much resembles Cranmer's description, including men in top hats. Sanderson wasted no time seeking out Cranmer to obtain more information about Thunderbirds once he learned his identity. On September 4th, suggesting that month's edition of Fate containing Cranmer's letter was released early, or that Sanderson had information, Sanderson sent one of his associates out to rural Pennsylvania to locate Cranmer. And that associate was none other than Al Bielek, who would go on to later fame with claims that he was involved in some of the most notorious conspiracy theories regarding secretive US military programs. Per biographer Ken Adachi, Bielek said he learned the truth about the government's involvement with PSYOPs and extraterrestrials while working as a contractor applying his electronics trade. He was then recruited into the Montauk Project, working at the organization's underground facility in Long Island. He led psychic and mind control programs there until the 1970s, and ultimately participated in time travel missions in which he visited Mars, additional planets, and other eras. Bielek, at one point, recovered lost memories of being aboard the USS Eldridge in 1943 during the infamous Philadelphia experiment. The purported test at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, designed to turn the ship invisible, allegedly caused it to vanish or teleport, fusing some crew members into the hull and driving others mad. Bielek claimed that he and his brother, Duncan Cameron, were transported to a hospital in the year 2137. Richard Grybos, Sanderson's resident staff member at Situ headquarters, said that Sanderson thought highly of Bielek, whom he had met in the 1950s and later appointed to the Situ Advisory Board. Grybos first met Bielek in 1969 at a Situ member dinner in Chicago, prior to a Sanderson appearance on WGN-TV. The two shared mutual interests and developed a friendship that lasted decades until Bielek's death in 2011. Grybos said that Bielek's engineering prowess was impressive. I have a difficult time to logically accept the Montauk time travel story. None of Al's predictions about the future came about, although I will state that he was earnest in his belief. And those claiming he was about fame and fortune don't realize Al died virtually penniless, said Grybos. Bielek visited Renovo, Pennsylvania on September 4th, 1963, to track down Cranmer. After asking around town, a gas station operator finally directed Bielek to Cranmer's remote home in mountainous and wooded Hammersley Fork. Hordes of cats roamed about the property, and Cranmer kept a gas flame burning outside 24 hours a day, per him to keep the mountain lions away. Bielek reported back to Sanderson about his visit with the enigmatic Cranmer. Mr. Cranmer is very elderly, estimated about 75 to 80. Cranmer was actually about 72 at the time. Though aging and slow, his mind seems clear and has a good memory. In fact, an excellent one. He suffers from the effects of gassing in World War I and says he has not worked much since then. His residence is very humble. An old shack, completely disordered, apparently a bachelor, but with a considerable library of old books and magazines strewn about, and many issues of Fate. Mr. C was very talkative, says he has seen many Thunderbirds since approximately 1899, his first. He describes them as always flying north in April, with one exception, a July 4th flying south. They fly low, follow the valley and creek routes, seldom get as high as the surrounding hilltops. Flying speed estimated by him at 20 miles per hour max. He described in detail the disappearance of several local inhabitants over the years, from old men to a young child, a girl of about 4, who was left alone for a few minutes by her sister while berry picking. The girl was not recovered or found. An old junk dealer, traveling alone in the fog, disappeared from his wagon and was not found. In 1 or 2 instances, the skeletons were found much later, invariably on a high and barren hilltop. They had been consumed, and apparently from his descriptions, included boring the skull to devour the brain. Several attempts in winter weather with light snow to trace disappearances of people with bloodhounds have been useless. According to Mr. C, they always doubled back on their trail. Sightings described covered the years from 1895 or 1899 through 1923, 1957, 1960, and possibly one later. I believe he noted the one in 1960 as being July 4th, being the one time seen flying south. He reiterated the Tombstone story about the bird being hauled in a wagon and spread-eagled on a barn wall, and 6 men arm to arm, equaling the wingspan. He also reran the story of some local Tombstone people dressing up as college profs, and going around saying there ain't no such, never was, and never will be, etc. Cranmer showed Bielek an old book that described a Thunderbird bone as turkey bone, that was 2.5 inches in diameter and approximately 18 inches long. Bielek said that Cranmer rambled on about his alternative takes on American history, such as the Greeks meeting the Algonquin people, a pre-1492 visit of Christopher Columbus to Greenland, and a trip by King Arthur to seek healing waters in the New World, during which he built a stone castle north of Renovo, and was buried there in a crypt upon his death in 455 AD. Cranmer claimed to have visited the crypt personally, and that it had been filled in with gravel years later, after a truck wrecked the stone dwelling. Either this is a sheer crock, or is some very interesting data that should be thoroughly investigated, opined Bielek. Bielek concluded that Cranmer was an interesting person who might have some valid data, but advised Sanderson that he should be prepared to sift thoroughly. More time spent with a tape recorder should be profitable. It does not appear that Sanderson followed up with Cranmer, as just under a year later, Cranmer wrote an introductory letter to Sanderson. "Dear Sir, maybe you may think this presumptuous in me, but you write such interesting stories," Cranmer began in his August 24, 1964 letter. Cranmer went on to suggest that the 1959 disappearance of 10-year-old Nicholas Bannon while hiking in Wilpena Pound, a natural amphitheater of mountains in South Australia, and the discovery of his skeletal remains nearly 3 years later, about half a mile up the 1.8-mile-high St. Mary's Peak, bore the hallmark of having been carried away by a giant bird. A detective involved in the recovery effort for Bannon suggested, alternatively, that the boy must have been attempting to climb the peak to orient himself after becoming lost, and had shown great courage in climbing up as far as he did. This is typical Brontotorns, or Thunderbird killing and eating, flying to higher ground where it could watch for foes while it devoured the victim, wrote Cranmer. The Thunderbird carries off and eats more than 50 people in the US every year, 2/3 children. Cranmer then explained to Sanderson at length his own experiences with Thunderbirds around his home in north-central Pennsylvania. "I have seen 7 Thunderbirds, beginning in April 1899, the next in 1902. I thought they were big cranes, although lighter in color. The next was in April 1922, when one flew over and past a pine tree, halfway up the mountain, with branches 50 feet wide, and the bird's wings were 2/3 the width of the branches. I never mentioned it for 35 years, when on March 27, 1957, a young man rushed in the house saying something big is in the sky. It flew past the same pine. I called the Legion in Renovo and asked if anyone had seen a big bird fly over Westport half an hour before. A man who had just came in said it flew over Westport. I asked the wingspread. He said 25 or 30 feet. I personally knew 4 men that have been carried off by Thunderbirds. In August 1897, Tommy Eggleton, an English youth, was carried off a bridge. In 1929, a farmer named Javonik, near Westport, Pennsylvania. In 1935, a man named McGuire near the road near Wharton, Pennsylvania. In 1942, Barney Pluff, an indigent, started from Renovo, Pennsylvania at dusk. He never reached the farm where he lived. Months later, human bones were found by a man hunting cows. Soon after the close of the Civil War, a dozen men were sitting on Uriah Hammersley's hotel porch, smoking, when a drunken lumberjack came down the road, talking and swearing to himself. It was getting dark, and when he had got 100 yards past the hotel, he began to holler, "Damn you, you let me go." The men ran down. The Kelly family ran up. They could hear him yelling, "Damn you, let me go," until he went out of hearing. Cranmer recounted other possible cases of Thunderbirds abducting victims from around the US, such as an 8-year-old boy in Rhode Island who vanished about a decade earlier, his bones later found by berry pickers. Interestingly, David Paulides has noted a trend of people often disappearing or being rediscovered near berry patches. Cranmer recounted the story of Oliver Hearst, who was snatched outside his Indiana farmhouse on Christmas Eve 1890, partygoers finding only his bucket and footprints, stopped suddenly in the snow, and hearing his cries from above. Cranmer is clearly repeating the story of Oliver Lurch, as told in an early 20th century newspaper article, which suggested some giant bird of prey as a possible culprit. However, the whole tale appears to be based on a short story called Charles Ashmore's Trail by Ambrose Bierce. The story also appears to have influenced Cranmer's tale of the drunken lumberjack. Cranmer recommended that Sanderson write an article to be circulated in Ludington, Michigan, in response to several missing persons, using searchers to check barren hilltops within 10 miles for human bones. The Thunderbird seizes its victims by the shoulders, flies to a bare hilltop, where it places its victims on its back, and then rips open the belly. begins eating while the victim is alive. Then it pecks a hole in the skull and eats the brains. Then if it's still hungry, it eats the meat. If several people are together, it won't attack, as for the last million years or so, Thunderbirds would be speared, wrote Cranmer. Cranmer further described the Thunderbird and introduced another bird unknown to conventional ornithology, the eastern condor. The drumsticks of the Thunderbird are 30 inches long and 2.5 inches thick. The Thunderbird is often confused with the eastern condor, a relation of the California condor but larger, the female being 14 feet and the male about 12 feet wingspread. The condor soars, while the Thunderbird flaps its wings like a goose or crane. In the Appalachian Mountains, from Alabama and Georgia to Canada, and west to the Ozarks, is the range of the eastern condor. Briefly, Cranmer touched on the topic of the Tombstone, Arizona Thunderbird. In 1900, 2 prospectors shot a Thunderbird, loaded it onto a burro, and brought it into Tombstone, Arizona. It was nailed on the side of the Tombstone Epitaph and measured 36 feet wingspread. He did not mention the infamous photo said to have been captured of the event in this letter. At length, Cranmer described several strange snakes he claimed could be found in Pennsylvania, such as the 20-foot giant black snake. 155 years ago, one taught my 10-year-old grandfather to swim. Grandfather was hoeing corn when a giant black snake came across the field. Grandfather dropped the hoe and jumped over the rail fence and into 10-foot deep Towanda Creek and swam 150 feet across. Grandfather was never afraid of water after that. Cranmer concluded his letter with an account of his personal interactions with Charles Fort, the famed chronicler of the strange, for which the term Fortean has been coined to describe researchers who share a similar interest in anomalous phenomena. Fort was also a major inspiration for Sanderson, who had attended one of Fort's lectures as a young man in New York City. I suppose I may be qualified as a Fortean, as I corresponded with Charles Fort in 1926-27, when he was writing his first book. He had a box number over in New Jersey, and represented himself as an old maid schoolteacher, wrote Cranmer. It started over the Hornell meteor, which fell December 27, 1825, and Harvard asked for observers to write in their observations, which I did. Fort read it in an astronomical periodical and wrote me. After a few letters, I made a graph from his handwriting. Age 40 plus, education high school plus, sex male. I promptly received a reply. Your chart is good. In fact, it's damn good. But when he got his book finished and stated the moon is only 200 miles away, I didn't correspond with him anymore. Sanderson replied to Cranmer on September 15th, assuring him, I know all about you, and was, as a matter of fact, on my way up to visit you about this time last year. But my car was hit by a truck as I was leaving New York with 2 friends, and by the time I got a new car, it was too late in the season. I'm going to try again this fall, and I hope within the coming month. Sanderson told Cranmer he looked forward to meeting him, and wrote, I have quite a lot to tell you about Thunderbirds worldwide, but mostly in the Western Hemisphere. I did some research into the photograph taken in Nevada at the turn of the century, when I was out that way. This is an intriguing reference to the Thunderbird photo, as Sanderson recalled in the April 1972 issue of the Situ newsletter Pursuit that he had once owned a copy of the photograph, but he never stated where he obtained it. Sanderson did write in the 1972 article that there just might be a clue to all this ridiculous jazz. There was once a tombstone in Nevada as well as in Arizona. It does not appear in any gazetteer anymore, but I think I drove by it in 1959. It has probably long since become a ghost town, but whether it ever had a newspaper, who is now to tell? But that any such newspaper also be called the Epitaph is just too much to ask. This writer has yet to find evidence of there being a Tombstone, Nevada, outside of historical newspaper references that were clearly in error and meaning to refer to the Arizona city. The Nevada Historical Society, upon my request, also researched its databases for a tombstone in that area, including ghost towns and mining camps, but came up empty. However, Sanderson did travel through Nevada and Arizona in 1959 during his year-long expedition across North America in a station wagon as he completed research for his 1961 natural history tome, The Continent We Live On. Perhaps he mixed up the Arizona city with a different location in Nevada. While the reference to Tombstone, Nevada might be erroneous, one does wonder if Sanderson indeed researched the Thunderbird photo, as he indicated to Cranmer, or even obtained his copy during his 1959 trip. Or could he have obtained it earlier, amassing it among his collection of Fortean materials? We can only guess based on the nebulous clues that Sanderson provided. I was very much surprised to receive a reply from you. I merely wished to aid you in your search of the Thunderbird. I was more surprised to learn you knew of me, Cranmer replied to Sanderson on September 16th. Cranmer delved into some alternative American history like he did with Bielek, including his assertion that King Arthur had lived in a stone house in Pennsylvania from 517 to 537 AD, and that the Native Americans called his knights the Iron Men due to their armor. He also shared that Cranmer is the old German name for storekeeper. Modern German is Kramer, sometimes spelled with a K. Cranmer presented what might be interpreted as a snarky disdain for some college academics, writing, "I have known many professors, some cooperative in exchanging knowledge. Others were hostile. Lately, the professors when they visit bring me tape recorders." Cranmer was likely referring to McEdward Leach, professor of English and folklore at the University of Pennsylvania, who visited Cranmer in January 1963 to record stories, including King Arthur's tomb, that were later printed in 2 penny ballads and $4 whiskey, edited by Kenneth S. Goldstein and Robert H. Byington, and published for the Pennsylvania Folklore Society in 1966. Leach called Cranmer one of the last good informants in the old tradition in Pennsylvania. However, Cranmer's comments about college professors reflect this passage from his letter about Thunderbirds that was published in the March 1966 Fate magazine, once again recounting his tale of the giant bird killed and then photographed in Tombstone, Arizona. A picture was taken of 6 men standing under it with their arms outstretched and fingers touching. The photo was copied in many newspapers. The editor notified colleges in states west of the Rockies, asking them to examine the bird, but no one came. So he got 6 actors dressed as professionals, wearing tall hats worn in the 19th century to pose with the bird. One of them was quoted as saying, "There ain't no such bird, never was, and never will be." The picture was circulated in newspapers all over the United States. Intriguingly, Cranmer asked Sanderson, "Back to the Thunderbird, does the picture you have show its beak? I have never been close enough to see its beak." Sanderson did not outright state that he had a copy of the photograph in his previous letter to Cranmer, but Cranmer appears to have interpreted it that way. Or was there some other communication that does not survive in the archives? It's another ghostly hint that suggests Sanderson might truly have had the photo without confirming it. Unfortunately, Sanderson did not answer Cranmer's query in any surviving letter. "Hoping to see you soon," Cranmer signed off. It does not appear Sanderson replied, as Cranmer wrote back to him on October 26, bemoaning that the writer hadn't made it out to Pennsylvania as he expected, but expressing his understanding that Sanderson was a busy man. He said he had intended to show Sanderson King Arthur's house, grave, and the Great Spirit's Spring, which had drawn the legendary British monarch from Wales in order to drink its healing water. Also, I intended to show you 2 places where Thunderbirds carried away men. Maybe better luck next time. Sanderson followed up on November 9th and assured Cranmer, "Don't underestimate me. I might be up your way before the really cold weather closes in. It looks as if we have a lot to talk about, and I am fascinated by some of the things you mention in your letter." A year and a half rolled by without any progress, until Sanderson became interested in writing a chapter on Thunderbirds for an upcoming book. It was planned for, but ultimately did not make the cut for Sanderson's 1967 book, Things, or his 1969 book, More Things, according to early outlines available in the Ivan Terence Sanderson papers, housed at the American Philosophical Library in Philadelphia. A draft of the Thunderbirds chapter survives in the Situ archive, but makes no mention of the Thunderbird photo. In an April 12, 1966 letter to Martin Singer, managing editor of Saga magazine, Sanderson, jovially acknowledging the presence of fellow Fortean writer John Keel as he typed the letter, requested permission to include content from Pearl's 1963 Thunderbirds article in a forthcoming book. "This is the age of monsters," Sanderson proclaimed. Keel, author of the Mothman Prophecies, shared his vivid memory of the Thunderbird photo in the 1990s, although his version was a little different than the giant bird trophy photo described elsewhere. "It looked like a pterodactyl or something. It had an enormous wingspread," he said. "The thing was sort of nailed to a barn, or hanging from a barn or something. And these men, a large group of men, were standing in front of it on a ramp. They were all very rustic looking, like real farmers, and one guy had on a top hat, and they referred to him in the caption as a college professor, but he was probably just another cowboy. I would say it was like the 1880s or something. Guhl believed he had seen the photograph of the huge black pterodactyl-like bird during the 1950s or 1960s, probably in a men's magazine like Saga or True, or a tabloid like The Tatler, Midnight, and other imitations of the National Enquirer. Guhl was good friends with Sanderson, and it is interesting that he was visiting with him when Sanderson typed his 1966 letter to Saga, seeking permission to reprint portions of Pearl's Monster Birds article. As Sanderson had a copy of the article in his files, is it possible that this is when Guhl learned the story, and he later extrapolated a false memory of having viewed the photo itself? Although, as Guhl said when questioned by Trovinsky, "I have a clear memory of the photograph, you know. It's one of those photographs that sticks in your mind. It's not something that I read about. It's something I saw." This energized interest in Thunderbirds apparently motivated Sanderson to renew contact with his longtime pen pal, Cranmer. "Well, here we go again," wrote Sanderson. He apologized for the long delay, citing the aforementioned car accident, a major surgery, and his continual writing duties, the latter of which would unfortunately still prevent him from visiting in person. However, Sanderson had another plan. "I'm sending my assistant, Jay Blick and Frank Graves, my right and left arms respectively, on my behalf. These two young men, between them, know just about everything that one has to know today to get something done. And they are not fools," Sanderson wrote. "If you could spare them a bit of your time, I would certainly appreciate it. Also, we might between us really get something done. One day I'll get to meet you personally. Meantime, this is the best I can do. Give them the works, will you?" Graves, 22, had met Sanderson while working for the author's publisher, Chilton Company, in Philadelphia. Sanderson made a unique first impression, wearing a bright Hawaiian shirt, barefoot, his thick gray hair slicked back, and speaking in a pronounced British accent. Graves expressed interest in Sanderson's book, Abominable Snowman, Legend Come to Life, and the two quickly hit it off. Sanderson invited Graves to visit him at his home in Blairstown, New Jersey, a little white farmhouse which seemed like it was in the middle of nowhere, but was frequented by a revolving door of Ivan's friends from publishing and a variety of other fields. Going up there was like stepping into another world, Graves told Hammerson Peters in 2018. Soon after, Sanderson encouraged Graves to join the American Expeditionary Society's 1965 journey to Canada's remote and notorious Headless Valley, which proved to be the adventure of a lifetime. Peters produced a documentary on Graves in 2018, dubbing him the Cryptid Hunter, based on some of the unusual creatures he investigated and encountered on the expedition. Blick, 17, grew up in Blairstown. Having developed an interest in UFOs, his mother knew of this guy who was into those things, and introduced him to Sanderson in the summer of 1963. He became a frequent visitor to Sanderson's home, reading through his files, and was there when plans for the Ivan T. Sanderson Foundation, later Situ, were developed. Blick worked one summer as a groundskeeper for Sanderson, and later earned $500 conducting research for Sanderson's 1967 book, Uninvited Visitors, A Biologist Looks at UFOs. Blick went off to Boston University in 1967, but would stop by to visit Sanderson during his trips home. Graves, several months off the thrilling expedition to Canada's untamed Nahanni Valley on Sanderson's behest, was eager to take on a new adventure. Sanderson had told Graves about Thunderbirds, sharing details from Pearl's article, like the Pennsylvania report sourced from Cranmer, the 1962 crash of United Airlines Flight 297 due to a collision with a big bird, in reality a flock of whistling swans, and the supposed killing of a Thunderbird in late 1800s Arizona, reported in the Tombstone Epitaph newspaper. I called Ivan up and said, "You know, this thing about Thunderbirds interests me. It's not very far away. It's only in Renovo, upstate here. I think I'll take a ride up there and see what's going on," recalled Graves. He treated the assignment seriously and wrote a detailed itinerary for the 6-day trip, from June 3rd to 8, 1966, to look for Thunderbirds in Pennsylvania. An experienced outdoorsman from his time spent in the Nahanni Valley, Graves planned an inventory to support an expedition into the bush to locate, photograph, and possibly down a Thunderbird, including such items as a sleeping bag, rope, compass, 2 cameras, cooking supplies, and a Holland & Holland .375 rifle with 20 rounds of ammo. I started telling Ivan what I was going to take with me, and I can hear him. He says, Frank, you're not going to the Belgian Congo. You're just driving to upstate PA. You don't have to take all this equipment with you and camping stuff. You can get a motel up there and just talk to people and come back." So I said yeah, "But I want to kind of get up into the woods and see what's going on," said Graves. He was talking like Thunderbirds are flying all over the place. "You're gonna have to shoot one down, easy. I really expected to see one. Why did I take guns with me? I was thinking, what would we do if one was on the ground, walking around the woods?" Blick, meanwhile, held a personal interest in Thunderbirds for years, and laboriously collected and read reports on them, much like his mentor, Sanderson. "I haven't encouraged your curiosity," said Blick. Graves met up with Blick at a motel in northern Pennsylvania, and the pair trekked on through the desolate hills of Clinton County in one of Sanderson's station wagons, the Green Dragon, loaded with camping supplies and scientific and recording equipment. Blick had driven the car there from Blairstown. Arriving in Renovo, Blick and Graves asked the local residents about Cranmer, and learned that High knew the woods so well that local government surveyors had relied on his knowledge for the name of local waterways, mountains, and paths. High's neighbors like him, but treat him and his stories in somewhat of a humorous vein, Blick wrote in an article recording the adventure. They kid him, but it's friendly, and they would give the shirts off their backs for High. Blick and Graves tracked Cranmer down to his small frame house in Hammersley Fork, about 10 miles northwest of Renovo, a former post office of which Cranmer had served as postmaster. The remnants of old postal regulations hung on the walls, and a rusty old safe sat ignored under the stairs. Blick described Cranmer as elderly and using a cane for support. He stood about 5 feet 8 inches tall, and had white hair, a bushy handlebar mustache, and bright, clear blue eyes. "He is a striking figure when he first meets your eyes," observed Blick. Cranmer's house was cluttered, filled with pet cats that dined on canned sardines Cranmer purchased for them during his infrequent journeys into town. Cranmer was an old guy. He was older than I am now, Graves recalled in 2019. Graves said that he did not see much of Cranmer's house. He had a rocking chair on his front porch. We just talked to him. I didn't even go into his house. We just sat on the front porch and talked to him, and he gave me a .45-60 bullet for an old-time rifle. I had it for a long time. High was reared on local legends, stemming from the time the Indians first inhabited the areas, from the time the French tried to mine for silver, to the present day, wrote Blick. He is choked with local history, legends, folk songs, and information. He reads a lot, appears to be self-educated, and has tendencies towards the unusual and bizarre. And he hates Germans. This antipathy originated during Cranmer's service in the First World War, when he was injured by mustard gas. He had survived on a small government pension and odd jobs ever since. He lives in a world of fantasy and of history, noted Blick. To him, what he reads is true, and what's more, he actually lives the stories he reads. Cranmer, chewing and spitting tobacco, entertained Blick and Graves with his routine slate of Thunderbird accounts. He shared a colorful anecdote about how the last mastodon was killed during the presidential administration of Thomas Jefferson, who ordered the remains sent to the Smithsonian for disposal. He claimed that President Franklin D. Roosevelt had been killed when his plane crashed into a nearby mountain peak, after which soldiers arrived with trucks and mules to clear away every bit of scrap metal. Blick and Graves attempted to verify the latter story with local residents and the police department, who stated the closest incident to the plane crash was a small Piper Cub that had been required to make a forced landing. But the story that really intrigued Blick was that of King Arthur's grave and his search for the Great Spirit Lake. Cranmer attempted to direct the young men to a local guide and the local forestry office for a map, but it was Sunday, and the office was closed. Blick said that when they offered the use of their station wagon to venture out to the Arthurian sites, Cranmer decided to accompany them. As the trio trundled along poorly paved roads, Cranmer pointed out sites of historical interest, such as a spot along a small creek where Daniel Boone killed 30 Indians and put a black stripe around the nearest tree for every vanquished foe. "There are a lot of black-striped trees around here," Cranmer said. The group drove up a steep and dusty dirt road to the house of a local guide, finding him and a few of his friends lying under a fir tree. They all warmly greeted Cranmer, but denied any knowledge of King Arthur's tomb or the Great Spirit Lake. Cranmer resigned himself to being the navigator. As they drove on, the climb became steeper, and the station wagon's engine began to fail. Arriving at a fork, Cranmer directed them down the left path, where they had to continually ford puddles that seemed like endless lakes. Then they arrived at a dead end, with absolutely no place to turn around. This turn of events forced Blick to reverse 300 yards to the nearest clearing, which rain had turned into a muddy sinkhole. The station wagon became mired in the mud, and it took the men an hour to free it. After that fiasco, Frank and I decided we had had enough, and to leave while the car and we were still in this world. Cranmer blamed the Germans for their troubles. Interviewed in 2018, Graves sighed when reminded about the sticky predicament with the station wagon and the effort required to free it. As for Cranmer's tales, Graves said, "I was interested in Thunderbirds. I didn't want to hear about King Arthur." We camped out that night and came to the conclusion that for all we cared now, King Arthur and the Holy Grail could stay buried, wrote Blick. Blick and Graves spent 2 nights camped in the woods at Heiner View State Park, a scenic lookout 6 miles from Renovo that overlooks the west branch of the Susquehanna River and the surrounding expanse of Sproul State Forest. Rising to an elevation of 1,940 feet, Heiner View today serves as a launching point for hang gliders. Considering that Thunderbirds could be nocturnal, Blick and Graves wandered the dirt roads around the overlook during the night. Graves figured the scenic overlook, with stars on full view, was an all-encompassing quiet, and civilization at a distance would be the best chance they had of spotting the mysterious big birds. It was beautiful scenery, but they did not see any Thunderbirds. I had a rifle, I had a shotgun, and we were camping and cooking stuff, and all of a sudden this guy pops out of nowhere, the game warden, remembered Graves. So he comes down, and he was nice, and he said, "What are you guys doing?" And I said, "Well, we're just camping, goofing around." And he sees the guns and he said, "Do you have a permit for that rifle?" I said, "No." "Do you have a permit for that shotgun?" I said, "No." "What do you want it for?" I said, "Self-protection." So he says, "Well, you really should have permits, and you can't have a fire without a permit. And we were just breaking the law all over the place, right?" So he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, what we're doing here is we're looking for information on Thunderbirds." And when we said that, he got real friendly and said, "Oh, Thunderbirds, oh yeah. People see those up here." I've never seen one. Graves explained to the game warden that they were conducting interviews and documenting their trip with cameras. After we said all that, he didn't care about the guns anymore. He just said good luck, and he left. Though unidentified, it is possible that this game warden was Chuck Keeper, who was assigned to Renovo as a district game protector for Western Clinton County in 1951, and served as a wildlife conservation officer and game law enforcer until his death from a heart condition on December 6, 1973. A 50-foot trail in Sproul State Forest is named in his honor. Keeper's daughter, Ellen, said she doesn't recall her father ever mentioning anything about Thunderbirds or the meeting with Graves and Blick. The encounter with my dad would not have been exciting enough to make it to our dinner table. Before leaving Renovo, the pair visited William Hess, a local fireman and historian. Hess said that Cranmer was a very interesting person and knew all of the local legends about the area. Graves admired a framed panoramic photograph of Heiner View that hung in Hess's office. Hess did tip them off to the seemingly anomalous presence of a large man-made iron chain that did not rust and was embedded in a giant boulder, located in a streambed about 10 miles from the nearest road. A different group from situ would return to the area in May 1971 to investigate the chain in the rock. They learned that it was a relic left over from the region's logging past. Lumberjacks would chop down white pine trees and float them down the river, where chains anchored in solid rock and stretched across the river would capture the logs for processing at a sawmill. Grybos, one of the investigators, wrote, "A 2-inch hole was drilled into the rock. A chain attached to an eye bolt was dropped into the hole, which was then filled with hot lead. If the links entered into the hole, so much the better for a firm grip. The chain in question was located 200 to 300 yards up Paddy Run from its intersection with Dark Hollow Run near Coudersport." As for King Arthur finding his Avalon in Pennsylvania, local historian and Lock Haven librarian Lou Bernard dug into this claim a few years back and uncovered what may be the source of the legend. Bernard visited the spot in Potter County that Cranmer had indicated, near Cross Fork, where Windfall Run joins Mud Lick in Susquehannock State Forest. A small wooden footbridge crosses the waterway. There is no cairn there today, although Cranmer had indicated it was destroyed long ago. According to some records, there was once a wealthy lumberman who lived in the area, and his name was Charles King, Bernard wrote, "Over time, it's not too hard to see how the rich man named King turned into King Arthur, with a repetition of the legend." Tragically, Cranmer's wealth of local folklore would be lost forever in the house fire that claimed his life on October 19, 1967. Robert R. Lyman Sr., who lived in Coudersport and documented north-central Pennsylvania's history of giant bird sightings in his 1972 book, Amazing Indeed, Strange Events in the Black Forest, including his own, reflected on Cranmer in a letter to Sanderson, dated April 16, 1970. "Hi, Cranmer is an enigma. For a time, his address was Renovo, but he actually lived at Hammersley Fork, Clinton County, Pennsylvania, only about 50 miles from my home. Hammersley Fork is a very small village in the most remote spot in our Black Forest, along the famous Kettle Creek, where more strange things have happened than any area I know of. I never met Hiram M. Cranmer. He was born 1st February 1891. On 10 October 1967, he lost the photo he had of a dead Thunderbird, all his manuscripts, his home, and his life in a fire. His near of kin did not understand him, and they have none of his tales. All who knew him agree that he was a truthful man, who often came to wrong conclusions that he could not prove. For example, he believed that the sudden disappearances of many persons in the Black Forest was explained by saying the Thunderbirds carried them away and devoured them. In my opinion, no bird with a wingspread up to 35 feet could fly away with anything larger than a very small child. Our local Indians said they liked the Thunderbirds and never harmed them." Lyman's statement that Cranmer himself owned a copy of the Thunderbird photo added a new wrinkle to the tale. In Amazing Indeed, Lyman further elaborated on this point. "I saw that picture in a daily paper. Many other persons remember seeing it. No one has been able to find it in recent years. 2 copies were at Hammersley Fork only a few years ago. One burned in a home. The other was taken away by strangers." Lyman is clearly referring to Cranmer, but what did he mean by there being 2 copies of the photo? And how could he have known that if he never met Cranmer? The clue might reside in Cranmer's letter, published in the September 1963 Fate magazine, the first known reference to the Thunderbird photo, which Lyman quoted passages from in his book. In the letter, Cranmer indeed described 2 separate images taken during the Tombstone incident. Sometime about the year 1900, 2 prospectors shot and carried into Tombstone, Arizona on a burrow one of these birds. When nailed against the wall of the Tombstone Epitaph, its wingspread measured 36 feet. A picture showed 6 men, with outstretched arms touching, standing under the bird. Later, a group of actors dressed as professors were photographed under the bird, with one of them saying, "Shucks, there is no such bird, never was and never will be." However, Cranmer never claimed, in print at least, to have owned a copy of the Thunderbird photo. The most he revealed about how he learned of the picture and its backstory was that it was shared with him by a lady in Tombstone, Arizona, who was a fellow reader of Fate magazine. This opens up the possibility that an Arizona resident shared with Cranmer a garbled, misremembered version of the April 26, 1890 article in the Tombstone Epitaph that described ranchers shooting down a gigantic dragon-like creature. As we've established, no photo was included in that article. Cranmer might then have incorporated that story about a dragon into his pre-existing fascination with giant birds. Also, what did Lyman mean by saying one of Cranmer's photos was taken away by strangers? Who were these mystery men or women? Considering that Lyman was in contact with Sanderson, it's possible the explanation lies in comments Sanderson would write in the pages of Sitchu's newsletter, Pursuit. By January 1971, Sanderson was trying to find a copy of the Thunderbird photograph. "This is one of the most frustrating items in our file," he wrote in Pursuit. "There is a photograph of a group of men holding a very large bird with an enormous wingspan. This is alleged to have first appeared in the Tombstone Epitaph, but that newspaper denies ever having published such a photograph. And despite the fact practically everyone seems to have seen it reproduced somewhere, no one seems to be able to find a copy. Our members number 17 and 49 investigated rumors of this giant bird in Pennsylvania several years ago, and are reported to have had a photostat of this elusive photograph with them. We have pursued them, and they are currently digging into their files. Should they find it, we will publish it in our next issue." Sanderson concluded by urging any Sitchu members who owned a copy of the image to send it in. Graves from Philadelphia was Sitchu number 49, and Blick, who attended Boston University, was number 17. Sanderson said that Mary and Kurt Fuller, editor and publisher of Fate magazine, recalled the photo and said they had published it in an early issue. Both the Fullers and Situ, who have a full set of Fate in its library, scoured each issue page by page and came up empty. In the April 1972 pursuit, Sanderson asserted that he had owned a copy of the Thunderbird photo and that it had gone missing. We had a copy once, but sent it off with 2 of our members on a field trip to Coudersport in northern Pennsylvania to look into a whole string of Thunderbird reports from that area. The photo was not returned to our files, and neither of our members, one who had moved to Boston, the other from Philadelphia, can find it in their files. The clincher on this one came when, 5 years later, another member who had never heard of the first 2 met a game warden who told them that 2 young men camping out in a special body green station wagon, ours, had shown him this photo. It is probable that one of the Situ team members who investigated the chain and rock met the same game warden who encountered Blick and Graves. However, Grybos, who was on that outing, does not recall such an exchange. These revelations appear to place Blick and Graves in possession of the Thunderbird photo. Were they the strangers who acquired one of Cranmer's photos? Or, conversely, did they take Sanderson's copy with them on their Thunderbird expedition? By whatever means the men obtained the photo, did they then show it to the game warden who encountered them while camping at Heiner's View State Park? While the pieces of this puzzle seem to fit, both Graves and Blick shed doubt on these scenarios when asked in 2018. Neither man recalled Cranmer owning a copy of the Thunderbird photo. Furthermore, Blick insisted that they did not take the Thunderbird photo with them. He did have a letter of introduction on Ivan T. Sanderson Society letterhead, signed by Sanderson, asking whomever they met to assist them in their research. In fact, Blick said he did show the letter of introduction to the game warden, an encounter he also remembered. Graves, who has an extraordinarily sharp memory, did not recall carrying the copy of the photo with them on the Pennsylvania trip. He hypothesized that if they did have it, the photo might have been acquired from Hess. Hess, who was the president of the West Branch Hose Company No. 2 in Renovo, passed away in 1997. His son, Bill Hess, said his father knew a lot of the area folklore that had been passed down from his own father. The elder Bill Hess, while a young boy in the 1930s, had been taken by his father to view the chain in rock. The younger Bill Hess said he had never heard of the Thunderbird photo, although his father knew the local legends about Thunderbirds. He said, "My father and grandfather told many stories of the area, but when you're very young, to you they are just fascinating stories." Although Blick and Graves deflated rumors that they were responsible for losing the Thunderbird photo, they each provided stunning testimony supporting its existence. Interviewed separately in 2018, both men, despite never communicating again after the 1966 trip, retained very similar memories of seeing the Thunderbird photo in Sanderson's files prior to the expedition. Graves hadn't even been aware of the long-standing search for the photograph until Peters first contacted him in 2018. "If I hadn't seen the picture, I wouldn't have gone on that trip. That's what I did. I saw a picture of a big bird, and I said, well, these things exist," said Graves. "I said, this looks real." He remembers sitting with Sanderson in his study, which had a pair of desks and typewriters for Sanderson and his wife, Alma. Behind them was a bookcase filled with, at the time, numerous copies of Abominable Snowman, Legend Come to Life, and a library full of Fate magazines and other Fortean publications. There were filing cabinets, some full of photographs of lions, cheetahs, and other wild animals. Ivan had files and files and files full of all kinds of photographs, drawings, and it was in there. Sanderson brought out a file folder and showed Graves a Thunderbird photo, as well as mentioning the Tombstone Epitaph, the crash of United Airlines Flight 297, as described in Pearl's article, and Cranmer's tale of seeing a Thunderbird flying down Shintown Run, as published in Fate. The Saga and Fate clips are still present in Sanderson's Thunderbirds file, held in the Situ archives. The photo itself, however, is frustratingly absent. Graves said, "I remember the picture, and the reason I remember it is you couldn't see the head of the bird. It was a black bird, and it looked like the picture was taken in 1890 or 1920, somewhere around there. And there was a barn, a structure. You could tell it was, I guess, a barn. It was a big wooden building, and there was this big black bird nailed to the barn, and there were 5 or 6 men standing in front of it, with their arms outstretched fingertip to fingertip, and it was about 30 feet wide. But the head had kind of slumped down, and nobody thought to prop it up, so you could see what the head looked like, the beak and all that, the structure. You couldn't see anything. All you could see was the wings, and people were standing in front of it, so you could see that it was a very large black bird. My impression was it was a raven. Graves' specific mention of the bird's beak being hidden is a striking parallel to Cranmer's asking Sanderson, "Does the picture you have show its beak?" I have never been close enough to see its beak. It makes one ponder if Cranmer saw the same photograph. According to Graves, the 6 or so men in the photo looked like farmers or lumberjacks, rugged outdoor types, and you could see their faces. Some wore cowboy hats, and their shirts were different shades. Some had on overalls. The photo was shot outside. There were vertical wooden planks behind them, although the roof of the building wasn't visible. The bird was suspended upright directly behind the men, the tops of its raven-like wings about the height of their shoulders. The actual picture itself was maybe 7 by 9, and it was obviously an old picture, said Graves. It was like a Xerox copy of an old photograph, like somebody took an old newspaper clipping and laid it on a machine and made a copy of it. You could see where it still had, around the edges of it, print from a newspaper. Graves outright rejected the notion that he might be misremembering the illustrated 2-page spread that opened Pearl's Saga article, describing an enormous and ferocious jet-black bird lifting an unfortunate man off the ground, combined with the article's description of the photo. "I saw it at Ivan's, but I didn't take it out of Ivan's," Graves stated adamantly. He and Blick both posed a convincing retort to the claim that they had taken Sanderson's one and only copy of the photo on their Pennsylvania trip. Sanderson owned a Xerox machine, so why would they have taken his original? Blick had a strikingly similar, although somewhat different recollection of the photograph compared to Graves. "It comes up periodically with my name associated with it. I don't have it. I remember seeing it in Ivan's files. Why no one would ever duplicate it again is one of those mysteries beyond me." "It showed a bunch of Western guys with a fairly crow-looking bird with an incredibly long wingspan," said Blick. "There were about half a dozen old Western-type men, scruffy-looking guys, not city slickers. They weren't Roy Rogers-style cowboys with 6 guns. They looked more like farmers. Some might have been wearing hats." Blick estimated that the bird had about a 12-foot wingspan. It was black, and he could see that it had a feathered head and a small beak. "The picture I saw, the bird wasn't nailed to the barn. It was being held up by these guys," Blick recalled. "They were holding it up themselves, holding onto the wingspan, and they were pointing at it." While the image of the Thunderbird hanging from a building is more common in witness recollections, Blick's version of the photo matches some other accounts that describe the men holding up the bird themselves. One version was sketched by comic artist Jamieson Richards, who remembered seeing it in a slender, hardback book, similar to collections released by Time Life. "It was in a newspaper. It was a clipping. It wasn't like an 8x10 glossy photo," said Blick. "I think it was in Ivan's file under Thunderbirds. He had a whole room filled with filing cabinets with clippings. People were sending him clippings all the time about ufology, strange animals, abominable snowmen. They were usually captioned with sources. The clip with the Thunderbird cited some paper like the Tombstone Epitaph. I believe that some people have already looked for it there, but to no avail. It could have come from some men's magazine at the time, maybe. It wasn't obviously a fake," said Blick. "Thinking about the picture, if I were to debunk it, I would say it was a crow, with additional crow wings attached. The guys were just showing off their crow hunting skills." However, Blick qualified that idea with, "Ivan was the zoologist. He'd be better equipped than me. I guess he thought it was real, so I deferred to his judgment. Species come and go on this planet," said Blick. "Maybe it was once there, and is no longer there." Sitchie's position on the 1966 expedition to find Thunderbirds in Pennsylvania was that it was a bit of a bust, as is the way with such Fortean enterprises. However, that small and mostly uneventful chapter in the organization's history had a lasting impact that has only grown over time. Sanderson and Cranmer, in conjunction, popularized Thunderbirds as an area of cryptozoological study, and reports of these big birds, in Pennsylvania and throughout North America, continue to be reported to this day. The missing Thunderbird photo remains an alluring mystery, combining the search for a mystery beast with a treasure hunt for an artifact that can prove its existence. It might be out there, in the dusty pages of some old magazine, just waiting to be pulled out of your grandfather's attic. Even in 1971, Sanderson reported that, while hundreds of people we know personally have seen this photograph, nobody can give us so much as a reference to any of the dozens of publications in which it has been reproduced. That number of witnesses has grown exponentially. Are thousands of people afflicted by false memories, or a Mandela effect like a glimpse into a parallel universe? Or is there a grain of truth here, pointing back to a vividly remembered, singular photo once held in the situ files? Sanderson died from cancer in 1973, but the desperate, determined search he started for the Thunderbird photo continues to this day.